Welcome, traveler. Step quietly into a world where ruins murmur secrets and dreams lead the brave to truths buried beneath centuries of silence. This is a tale not of war, but of memory, of a forgotten kingdom, a hidden tomb, and a peril that sleeps beneath the soil of Arnor. If you love ancient mysteries, noble legacies, and the slow, haunting beauty of lost realms, then let the wind guide you forward. In the north, where the wind drifts low and slow over hills cloaked in heather and fog, there lies a country that few now speak of by name. Once it was the realm of kings, tall men with star-browed crowns and memories as long as the rivers that laced their lands. This was Arnor, the northern kingdom of the Dunedain, kin to Gondor, yet fallen long before its sister in the south ever trembled. Where palaces once rose of white stone, now only root-choked foundations remain, and where kings once trod in halls of carved marble, only the hoarse cry of crows echoes. The world has turned many times since the banners of Arnor last caught the sun. Even the elves, long watchers of the world's slow decline, seldom speak of it now, save in riddled verse or a dreamlike sigh. But stories like seeds lie dormant in the soil of time, and when stirred by breath or footfall, they may yet rise. It began, as these tales often do, not with a clamor of horns or a flash of blades, but with silence, a parchment, a memory unburied. Serral, lawmaster of the fading West, sat in the echoing library of Mithlon, the Grey Havens. The air was thick with dust and the scent of dried ink. Candlelight flickered over scrolls that had not been touched in 100 years, perhaps more. His hands trembled, not with age, though he was old even by elven reckoning, but with a sense of peril long slumbering. Before him lay a map, not drawn by hand, but traced in a light like starlight trapped in paper. It showed the land of Arnor, but not as it is now, torn and tangled by time. No, this was Arnor as it had been, green and proud, the cities of Anuminas and Fornos glistening like twin jewels. But what drew Ciodarn's gaze most was a mark in the hills west of Lake Haven, a symbol not seen in centuries, a star wreathed in flame. Beneath it, written in tenuire, so faint it seemed more dream than word, was a single name. Ellen, son of Isildur, Kirinol whispered. The name carried the weight of a forgotten crown. He had died long ago, slain beside his father in the disaster of the Gladden Fields. His tomb, it was said, lay in the crypts of Fornos, sealed forever. But if this map spoke true, it had not remained there. And so, the silence cracked. He sent for a ranger, not just any wanderer of the wilds, but one he had watched from afar, a man whose blood ran close to kings, though he bore it like a burden rather than a right. His name was Calamir, and he came as summoned, wordless and weary. His eyes were gray like a storm over the sea, and his voice carried the weight of cold nights and lonely watchfires. Ciodarn did not greet him with ceremony. He merely unrolled the map and spoke. "Tell me what you know of the tomb of Eleanor." Calamir frowned. "It lies in Fornos, beneath the Hall of the Kings, lost to time and ruin. So says the common tale," Ciodarn murmured. "But legends, true legends, do not vanish. They are hidden, disguised, awaiting the hour when they must be found again." Calamir said nothing, but his hand, resting lightly on the hilt of his sword, tightened. "The tomb has vanished," Kiodarn continued, voice low. "And not alone. 3 others of the royal line are missing. Tombs long thought sealed. No sign of plunder. No tracks of orc or thief. Only the hollow silence where memory should rest." "Then who?" Calamir asked. "This," said the lawmaster, "is the mystery." And thus began the journey. Calamir rode east beneath the shivering stars, past the hills of Aen Uyal, through lands that once hummed with song, but now slept in thistle and thorn. He passed crumbling towers where moss hung like old banners, and the stones whispered of grief. At every ruin he paused. At each barrow he listened. The world of Arnor was not empty. Shadows clung to its bones, and the wind carried voices that had no mouths. The dead did not lie easy in that land. He came at last to the Barrow Downs, and though they were far south of where his path ought to lead, something drew him there, a pull older than memory. The hills were quiet too. He lit no fire that night, for the stars gave no comfort. In his dreams, he saw a face, pale, noble, sorrowful, crowned with twilight and rimmed in silver. Elendor, the name whispered through his sleep like a breath on glass. He awoke before dawn to find a figure standing on the ridge, cloaked in gray. It was not a wight. It did not shimmer with malice or hunger. It simply stood, waiting. Calamir rose, hand at his sword, but did not draw. "You do not belong here," he said quietly. "Nor do the dead," replied the figure. It stepped forward, and by the light of the waking sun, Calamir saw a woman, tall, wrapped in a scholar's cloak, with hair the color of shadowed bronze and eyes sharp with thought. "I am Sarah of Gondor," she said, "scribe and seeker. You are hunting the tombs of Arnor." "So am I." Calamir hesitated. "How did you find me?" "I followed the same whisper you did," she replied. "The one that speaks in dreams and broken stone." He studied her for a moment. She bore no weapons, only scrolls and a satchel of ink-stained tools. But there was fire in her gaze and steel in her voice. Together they turned toward the north. Unseen behind them, a wind stirred among the barrow rows, and something old awoke. The road north from the Barrow Downs to the ruins of Fornost was little more than a ghost trail, a suggestion rather than a path. The land had grown wild over the centuries, and though maps still bore the names, the forest had begun to reclaim what was once the realm of men. Trees rose where avenues had once unfurled in flagstone, and roots cracked the bones of roads worn smooth by royal boots long dead. Calamir and Sarah rode in silence, their breaths fogging in the chill air, the muffled sound of hooves lost beneath the hush of moss and leaves. They had been traveling for 4 days before the towers of Fornost came into view, if towers they could still be called. Once the northern seat of kings, Fornost Irion had risen proud upon the western edge of the North Downs, its walls tall and defiant against the threats that had crept in from Angmar in darker times. Now it was a broken silhouette. Jagged remnants of walls stood like teeth against the sky, and the central keep, once crowned with a dome of silvered stone, had collapsed inward like the skull of a fallen giant. But despite the ruin, something about the place still held a breath of majesty, like a song hummed from behind a veil. Sarah, dismounting, stood silently for a long time, her fingers trailing along a fallen column etched with faded runes. "The weight of memory here is heavier than stone," she murmured. Calamir nodded. He had been here once before, years ago as a younger man. Then the place had felt empty, silent, and cold. Now it felt full, but not with the living. "Be wary of the wind in these ruins," he said. "It carries voices." As they descended into the heart of the ruin, the hush deepened. Sarah had brought with her a scroll bearing a partial layout of the royal crypts below Fornost, copied from fragments found in Gondor's Hall of Law. It was incomplete, worn by time and poor handling, but it gave them something to follow. They made their way through the shattered remnants of the Great Hall, past statues of kings whose names had long since faded from memory, and down into the vault beneath. There, in the deep dark, they found the tombs, stone doors carved with the sigils of old, stars, trees, and crowns, worn smooth by the passage of years. Dust clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of long-sealed places. Calamir lit a lantern, and its amber glow spread cautiously into the dark, revealing crypts lined like silent sentinels. Each bore a name: Malbed, Arrived, Tarandor. But where Elendor should have stood, there was nothing. Only a blank wall, smooth and untouched. Sarah traced her fingers over the stone, her brow furrowed. "There is no sign it was ever here," she said softly. "And yet every record, every tale, places him here." "Perhaps the records lie," Calamir said. Sarah shook her head. "Not all of them. I found a letter, an old one, sealed with the emblem of Gil-galad. It spoke of Elendor's burial with reverence, and of the guardians who watched over his sleep. He was not entombed in obscurity." They searched the chamber further, and as the hours passed, the lantern light flickered lower, shadows lengthening. Just as they turned to leave, Sarah paused beside one of the crypts. Tarandor's, a lesser-known king whose reign had marked a time of slow decline. Her fingers brushed an engraving near the base, nearly invisible, a small crescent rune beneath a standard inscription. She knelt, brushing away centuries of grime. Beneath the dust lay an interlocking series of symbols, runes in the old tongue, woven into a pattern of stars and lines. "It's a cipher," she breathed. Together they deciphered it, the words slow to emerge. "Where stars are drowned, the air shall sleep. Seek the mouth that does not drink beneath the gaze of shattered crowns." Calamir frowned. "A riddle or a direction," Sarah said, excitement rising in her voice. "If we can understand it." But even as they stood pondering, a chill crept through the air, too sudden, too sharp. Calamir's hand went to his sword. From the far end of the crypt, a whisper stirred, not of wind, but of breath drawn through long-dead lungs. A figure emerged, robed in rags, its face veiled in shadow. Not a white, not entirely. There was no hatred in it, no hunger, only sorrow. "You walk the halls of the sleeping," it said in a voice like water on stone. "Why do you wake them?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "We seek Elendor. His tomb is gone." The figure tilted its head. "Not gone, removed, hidden, for fear and for hope." "By whom?" The answer came slowly, as though spoken from a great depth. "By those who remembered what should not be known." Calamir's brow furrowed. What was it they feared? The figure's hand lifted, pointing, not at them, but past them, through the walls, toward the distant lake beyond Fornost's reach, the memory of kings, the fire and the blood, the broken oath, and then it was gone. vanishing like smoke into the stone. They said nothing for a long time. At last, Sarah turned. "We have to go to Lake Evendim." Calamir nodded. The mouth that does not drink, a dry cave beneath the lake's gaze. Perhaps. She rolled up the scroll, tucking it safely into her satchel. But we're not alone anymore. Calamir sheathed his sword. We never were. Above, the last light of day slipped behind the hills, and night fell upon Fornos like a shroud. In the deep dark of the crypts, something stirred. Not a ghost, not a wight, but memory. Memory given shape and shadow. The tomb of Elendor was not lost. It had been hidden, for a reason. They departed Fornos at first light, though the sky gave little indication of dawn. A paw of mist clung to the land, thick and unmoving, as if the very air hesitated to breathe. Calamir rode with his cloak pulled tight, eyes fixed on the winding trail ahead. Sarah rode behind, the worn scrolls in her satchel rustling like whispers with each jolt of the horse's step. Neither spoke. For a time, silence had become their companion, an uninvited third rider whose presence grew heavier the nearer they drew to the heart of Arnor's forgotten lands. Lake Evendim lay 2 days north by horse, a still mirror nestled in a bowl of green hills and stony cliffs. It had once been the heart of the kingdom, the site of Annúminas, the first capital of the northern Dunedain. Now it was a realm of silence and reflection, where the bones of the city slept beneath the water's glassy skin. The lake was deep, deeper than the eye could judge, and in its calmest moments it was said that stars appeared in its depths long before they graced the sky above. The elves called it Nenuil, the Lake of Twilight. The men of the north remembered it as sacred ground, though few remained who remembered at all. As they rode, Sarah spoke softly, more to herself than to Calamir. The riddle said, "Where stars are drowned." Could it mean the lake itself? A tomb hidden beneath the water? Calamir did not answer at first. His thoughts were far off, clouded by memories he did not summon and dreams that clung like cobwebs to the edge of waking. "Stars don't drown in water," he said at last, "unless they fall. A place where the heavens are reflected but not reached. A place where the past lingers like a ghost." He turned in the saddle. "We're not looking beneath the lake. We're looking beneath its gaze." Sarah met his eyes, frowning. "The cliffs?" He nodded. "There's a shelf of stone on the northern side. My father once told me of caves there, dry even when the lake swells. Few go there now. The paths are crumbling and the rock is treacherous." Her voice was almost a whisper. "Then that is where we must go." By the second dusk, the lake lay before them, a sheet of stillness bordered by ancient trees and the skeletal remains of Annúminas, half swallowed by ivy and time. Columns once graced with silver inlay, now leaned like weary sentinels, their reflections shimmering in the water. A cold breeze swept across the lake, stirring only the surface, as if reluctant to disturb the depths. Calamir led the way around its edge, his horse stepping lightly over the stones, while Sarah trailed behind, her eyes scanning the cliffs above. As night fell, they made camp in the shadow of a broken tower, whose top had collapsed into the reeds. A fire flickered between them, muted and weary. The lake glistened nearby, black as polished obsidian, reflecting a crescent moon and 1,000 unseen stars. Sarah unrolled the scroll again, poring over the cipher etched in the ancient tongue. She traced the lines with a fingertip, not reading so much as listening. At last she looked up. The shattered crowns. Do you suppose it refers to the statues? There were 9 once, weren't there? Kings of Arnor, seated along the water's edge. Calamir nodded slowly. One for each generation before the kingdom split. I've seen the remains. Only 2 still stand. Sarah leaned closer to the fire. Then we'll search there tomorrow. The gaze of the crowns may point us toward the hidden mouth. But neither of them slept easily. That night, the lake whispered. It was not the wind. It was not the shifting of reeds or the cry of night birds. It was deeper, subtler, a sigh from beneath the water, as if the stones themselves breathed in slow remembrance. Calamir lay awake, staring at the stars reflected in the blackness, and thought again of the dream he had in the Barrow Downs. The face, pale and sorrowful, crowned not with gold, but with burden. At the edge of sleep, he heard another sound, the clink of stone, the hollow note of metal brushing metal, and a voice, a man's voice, faint and distant. Shall return when all is ash, when fire remembers its name. Then silence again, deep and unbroken. He did not speak of it to Sarah the next morning, though her eyes told him she had heard something as well. They climbed the cliffs at midday. The path was as treacherous as Calamir had said, crumbled in places, overgrown in others, the stones slick with moss and time. Sarah moved with the care of one not born to the wilds, but she was resolute, her grip steady even when the wind pulled at her cloak like unseen fingers. Halfway up, they paused beside the remains of the statues, enormous figures carved in the likeness of kings long dead, seated as though still watching over the lake. Most had fallen, their faces shattered, but 2 still stood, one headless, the other cracked down the middle as though split by lightning. Between them lay a hollow in the cliffside, so subtle it might have been nothing more than a shadow at noon. But in the evening light, it became something else, a cleft in the rock, narrow and tall, like the doorway to a forgotten hall. Calamir stepped forward first, drawing his lantern. Its light revealed a narrow corridor of stone descending steeply into the heart of the cliff. No markings, Sarah said, her voice hushed. No runes, no seal. It wasn't meant to be found, Calamir replied. They entered. The descent was steep, the steps uneven, worn not by frequent passage but by the slow erosion of water and time. The walls narrowed as they went, and the air grew colder, filled with a scent like old paper and damp stone. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel opened into a chamber, round, with a domed ceiling and a floor tiled in star-like black stone. At its center rested a sarcophagus, black as obsidian, its lid untouched. There were no inscriptions, no sigils, only the stone, smooth and perfect, as though carved not by chisel, but by will alone. Sarah stepped forward, and as she did, her lantern caught something, a glint at the far wall. She turned. Embedded in the stone was a tablet no larger than a shield, carved in Elvish and sealed in wax. She read aloud, her voice trembling, "Here lies Elendor, last light of the west. Let none disturb his sleep, for he dreams of a fire yet unkindled and a crown not yet claimed. When the stars fall into shadow and the line of kings is no more, then shall he rise, not in body, but in truth." They stared at the words, the echo of them lingering in the chamber. "He was hidden," Sarah whispered, "not to be protected, but to protect something else." Calamir moved to the tomb, running his hand along its smooth surface, a legacy buried until its time. Behind them, the shadows shifted, not from lantern or movement, but with intent. The chamber was not empty. The air in the chamber thickened, not with dust or decay, but with something weightless and ancient, like the tension in a dream before the meaning becomes clear. Calimere stepped back from the tomb, his lantern casting long, trembling shadows against the curved walls. Behind him, Sarah stood still, her gaze caught not by fear but by a deeper awareness, as though a thread had been pulled in the fabric of time, and they now stood in the ripple of its unraveling. Neither spoke, for speaking felt wrong in that place. It was not simply the tomb of a man, but the last breath of a forgotten promise, sealed in silence and stone. And then from the dark edge of the chamber, a figure emerged, not as a specter nor a beast from shadow, but a man, tall, robed in gray, with a hood drawn low over his face. His steps made no sound. He bore no torch, no weapon. Yet his presence changed the air, made it colder, more lucid. Calimere's hand reached for his sword, but something in him hesitated. This was no enemy of flesh. There was no threat in the figure's bearing, only sorrow, so heavy it seemed to hang from his shoulders like a mantle wrought of iron and memory. The figure spoke, and his voice was like a low wind through winter branches, calm, slow, and old. "You have come far, children of dust. You have found what was not meant to be found." Sarah stepped forward, eyes bright with defiance and wonder. "We seek truth, not trespass. This tomb was hidden not to guard against time or war," the figure said, "but to bury a truth too dangerous to endure." "What was it Elendor knew," Sarah asked, "that the kings of Arnor chose to forget?" The figure turned his hooded head toward her. Though his face remained in shadow, the air seemed to shift, as if her words had stirred an unseen current. "Elendor," he said, and in that name there was not just reverence, but mourning, was the last to see the West clearly, before the line faltered and split beneath the weight of pride. He knew that the legacy of Numenor was a blade with two edges, one bright with wisdom, the other dark with wrath. He saw that to preserve the light, it must be hidden, for men no longer had the strength to bear it. Calimere took a step forward, his voice low, careful. "What light?" The hooded figure raised a hand, not in warning, but in memory. "There was once an oath sworn by Isildur, not the one that bound the dead men of Dunharrow, but a quieter one, spoken only to his son. It was a vow to guard a secret given to him at the fall of Numenor, when the world bent and the seas drank the pride of kings. He carried something with him from the wreckage, not a weapon nor a jewel, but knowledge, a vision." Tarot's voice barely rose above a whisper. "A prophecy?" "More than that," the figure replied. "A glimpse into what must come after the fading of the West. A future seen not through the eyes of elves or gods, but through the dream of men, their sorrow, their hope, their fire." Isildur passed it to Elendor, and Elendor, seeing what such knowledge might become, chose to bury it. He gave himself not only to death, but to silence. A long pause followed. The shadows on the walls seemed to twist and lean inward, listening. The stars on the tiled floor glimmered faintly in the lantern light, as if echoing a sky long forgotten. Sarah looked toward the obsidian tomb, and for a moment she saw it differently, not as a prison for the dead, but a vault for the living, a cradle holding something fragile, waiting to wait. She turned to the figure, her tone steady. "And now? Why let us come? Why let us see? The figure lowered his hood, revealing a face lined with age, though untouched by the wear of mortal years. His hair was silver as frost, his eyes deep gray, neither elf nor man. His voice, when he spoke again, had softened. Because the hour is near, the west has crumbled into stories. The east stirs once more. The heirs of kings walk in rags. The fire is nearly out. Elendor's truth may soon be needed, not to raise a king, but to remind the world that one once was. Calamir's gaze locked with the old man's. Then what do you ask of us? The old figure stepped aside, motioning toward the sealed tomb. Not to open it, not yet, but to carry the memory of this place, to keep it secret and sacred. There are those who would twist Elendor's vision into fire and ruin. Let his dream remain a dream until the world is ready to remember it rightly. Sarah looked down, her hands trembling slightly over the scroll case at her side. Her whole life had been the pursuit of knowledge, of light cast upon the shadows of history. And yet in that moment, she understood something no scroll could teach, that some truths are not torches to be held high, but embers to be carried quietly through the night. She gave a single nod. I will write nothing, she said. Not yet, but I will remember. Calamir, ever a man of fewer words, gave a silent bow. The old figure stepped back into the shadows. Then go. Leave this place before its silence closes again. You have walked far into the memory of kings. Now return to the world of the waking. They climbed in silence back through the narrow tunnel, their lanterns flickering like the last gleam of starlight before the dawn. Outside, the lake remained still, its surface smooth and knowing. The statues of the broken kings stood as they had before. But now in the wind that stirred the grass at their feet, Calamir thought he heard something new. A faint voice, as if from a distant hall, saying, not farewell, but wait. When they reached their horses, the sun was rising beyond the hills, casting gold across the lake's surface. The shadows of the cliffs fell long behind them. Sarah mounted slowly, the weight of what they had seen settling into her bones like winter. Calamir looked once more toward the hidden cleft, now invisible in daylight, as if it had never been. They did not speak of what they would tell others, or of how much to guard. That decision would come in time. For now they carried a memory between them, a secret not born of greed or fear, but of reverence. Elendor still slept, and with him, the fire he had dared to dream. And somewhere, in the silence of the tomb, the stars above him glowed faintly, waiting. The road from Lake Evendim to the south wound like a river through the green silence of forgotten woods and weather-worn hills, passing through lands where no banners flew and no horns called the watch. Here the world had grown old and watchful, a place where stories whispered among trees rather than shouted from stone towers. Calamir and Sarah rode in thoughtful silence, their horses weary, their minds more so. The knowledge they bore was weightless in form, yet heavy in consequence, a secret older than their own names, wrapped in prophecy, remembrance, and the quiet defiance of a prince who had chosen to be forgotten. They had left no mark behind, no cairn was raised, no words carved into bark or stone. The chamber in the cliffside returned to its slumber, as though no mortal had stirred within it. This was not a victory to be proclaimed, but a wound reopened, a glimpse into a truth that had been hidden because the world was not ready to carry it. The tomb of Elendor was not merely a burial site. It was a decision, etched in black stone and silence, to wait until the world could dream again, without turning vision into tyranny. By the second night, they camped beneath the broken boughs of a lightning-split tree, its twisted limbs reaching upward like a frozen cry. The stars above were clear and indifferent, scattering their ancient light as if to remind them how small their discoveries truly were. But in Sarah's eyes there was a kindled fire, one not born of ambition, but of awe. She stared into the coals of their campfire for a long time before she spoke, and when she did, her voice was low and uncertain. "I wonder if we were meant to find it at all," she said, not looking up, "or if we stumbled across something sacred by mistake." Calamir did not answer at once. He sat sharpening his blade by habit, though there was no enemy near, no threat on the wind. His eyes were on the stars, but his thoughts were beneath the stone, in the silence of that chamber. "Sometimes the world chooses its messengers poorly," he said at last, "but perhaps that is the point. Great truths often come not to kings or heralds, but to those quiet enough to listen." Sarah smiled faintly, her fingers tracing the edge of her satchel, where the scroll lay wrapped in oilskin and memory. "I've spent half my life looking for what I found in that cave, and now that I've seen it, I don't know what to do with it." "Then hold it," Calamir said, his voice steady. "That is enough. Hold it. Guard it. Remember it. When the time comes, you'll know." She turned to him, eyes sharp through the shadows. "And if I don't?" He met her gaze with calm certainty. "Then I will." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of trust, unspoken and profound, binding them with something deeper than oath or command. A quiet companionship forged not by shared past, but by the future they might one day choose to protect. As the fire burned low, they slept in turns, each watching while the other dreamed, each wondering whether Morpheus himself drifted in their sleep, stirring old visions like silt from the depths of time. The next day they crossed the Greenway, once the proud road of commerce and royal passage, now overgrown and broken, its stones jostled by roots and half swallowed by the earth. Few traveled these paths anymore, save for scattered rangers and the occasional merchant mad enough to test the wilds. They stopped briefly in Andreth, a wind-scoured hill between the Barrow Downs and Bree, where a lone way house still offered shelter. There they found food, water, and news. The south was restless, and rumor ran like wildfire through the smaller towns. Murmurs of black ships in the east, strange lights seen beyond the misty mountains, and whispers that a shadow was growing, slowly, imperceptibly, but with intent. Calamir listened with the quiet attention of one trained to hear more than was said. Sarah scribbled in her journal by habit, but even she seemed subdued, the recent weight of discovery shadowing her usual hunger for detail. That night, as they sat near the hearth in the common room of the way house, a wandering peddler shared a tale he claimed had come from Gondor, a rumor that the white tree had withered in a recent storm, and that the steward had taken it as an omen of endings. "Of course," the man added with a grin, missing 3 teeth. "Trees do die, and omens blow whichever way the winds feel in." But Calamir did not smile, nor did Sarah. Later, when the fire had burned low and the peddler snored into his tankard, she leaned close and whispered, "What if Elendor's dream was never about one king or one time, but something older? A memory from Numenor that was never meant to reach our age?" Calamir's answer was quiet and steady, like the voice of a watchman facing the dark. Then it survived for a reason. They left at dawn, following the road east toward the Weather Hills, where the ruins of Amon Sul still watch from the high crags, like a sentinel turned to stone. From there, they would part ways, Sarah to Gondor, to vanish into her library and guard the memory in silence. Calamir to the wilds to keep watch on roads and rivers, listening for the tremble in the world that might signal the time had come. As they neared Weathertop, the sky changed. Clouds gathered low and heavy, not with storm, but with silence. The hill itself loomed above them, its crown ringed with ancient stone, a monument to long-dead vigilance. They climbed together one final time, reaching the summit by midday. There, with the wind whipping their cloaks and the land spread wide before them, they paused. Sarah turned, her hair caught in the wind like fire in flight. "Do you believe the dream will come true?" Calamir looked out across the north, the wild, broken realm of Arnor sleeping beneath the years. His eyes were calm, but in them burned something old. "I believe that dreams do not die," he said. "They wait." She nodded once, then held out her hand. "Then may we both wake in time to remember it." He clasped her wrist in farewell, a ranger's gesture, not a courtly one. Then she turned and rode south, the wind at her back, the scroll hidden deep in her pack, and the memory of the tomb deeper still in her heart. Calamir remained on the hill until sunset, watching the light bend across the land, casting long shadows like the fingers of kings reaching from the past. When the stars emerged, mirrored faintly on the horizon, he bowed his head, not in reverence, but in recognition. Elendor still slept, but the world was beginning to stir. The years that followed moved with the slow, deliberate pace of mountain rivers, sometimes gentle, sometimes swelling, but always in one direction, ever onward. The tale of Elendor's hidden tomb faded from the world's noise, swallowed once again by the hush of ancient places. No new rumors surfaced. No wild-eyed wanderers came whispering of black tablets or forgotten kings. The few who might have searched found nothing, for the passage beneath the cliffs had disappeared beneath a rockfall that looked natural, as though the land itself had chosen to seal the secret once more. Only two remembered where the dream was buried, Seraph in the vaulted shadows of Gondor's libraries, and Calamir in the open wild, walking the untamed paths of a kingdom that no longer wore a crown. Calamir became more ghost than man to the folk of the north. They spoke of him in hushed tones, when they spoke of him at all, a tall figure in a gray cloak, appearing like breath on a cold window pane, vanishing without sound. He left no trail, yet danger fled before his coming. Wolves avoided the hamlets he passed through. Strange footprints in the snow that had troubled herders would vanish after his visits. Children in Bree began to say that he could hear the trees speak, and that the ravens brought him messages, though no one ever saw him talk to birds. Only the rangers knew the truth, that Calamir had taken upon himself a watch deeper than the bounds of his duty. He listened not only for the cries of encroaching evil, but for the tremble of forgotten things stirring in their sleep. Meanwhile, in Minas Tirith, beneath the looming shadow of Mindalluin and the ever-pale light of the white tree, Sarah lived like a whisper among scrolls. Her name never reached the councils of the steward, and she did not seek the ear of nobles. She was a scribe among scribes, one of dozens who copied fading records, mended broken spines, and preserved the crumbling thoughts of long-dead kings. Yet none could match her memory. She walked the halls of the Hall of Kings with a quiet intensity, her steps soft but sure, as she navigated not marble and dust, but the narrow corridors of time itself. Beneath her robes, hidden in a satchel stitched with ancient runes, the sealed copy of Elendor's prophecy lay untouched. She had not opened it since returning from the lake. She dared not. The words still lived inside her, perfectly remembered, as though carved into her breath. And though she wrote many things in the long, quiet years, translations of elven songs, genealogies of forgotten lords, even a treatise on Númenorian architecture, she never wrote a single line of what she had seen beneath the shattered crowns. But she waited. The signs, when they came, were not loud. The world does not always announce the turning of its great wheels. Sometimes it is the wind that changes first, or the silence in a place that once buzzed with life. Sometimes it is the sudden absence of birdsong, or the way fires burn lower, though the wood is dry. Sarif began to notice these signs, not in reports or scrolls, but in the way the scribes around her grew anxious without knowing why, in how the white tree's leaves trembled even when there was no breeze. Travelers from the east began to speak of darkening skies and rivers that ran cold even in summer, and always there were dreams. People spoke of them reluctantly, half-remembered visions of a city beneath the waves, or a crown lying in ash, or a voice that called their name in a language they did not know. Some laughed them off, others prayed more often. Sarah said nothing, but at night she lay with her hand over her satchel and wondered if the time had come. Far to the north, Calamir too felt the shifting of the world, not in dreams, but in the rhythm of the land itself. Animals fled earlier than they used to, and strange tracks appeared near the ruins of Rudor. Shapes too large, too heavy for man or beast. In the hills west of Fornost, he found a standing stone he had marked with his own hand, shattered into dust, though no storm had passed. One night, beneath the broken tower where he had once watched the stars, he awoke to find the wind whispering a single name, Elendor. Though no one stood nearby, he knew then the waiting was over. They did not need to send word to one another. That was not the bond they shared. It was deeper than message or signal, a tether woven of memory, duty, and the quiet promise made between kindred spirits who had touched a truth larger than themselves. Sarah packed her satchel and descended from the Tower of Records with no farewell. Calamir turned south toward the lake, his steps silent as always but now urgent. The land greeted their return like a breath held too long. The cliffs of Nenuil rose pale and weathered above the mirrored waters, and though many years had passed, the hidden way revealed itself again, not by accident or chance, but as if summoned by the right convergence of wind, time, and will. The rockfall that had buried the entrance had shifted. Where once the mouth of stone had vanished, now it yawned again, darker than memory, waiting. They arrived within hours of one another, and when their eyes met, there was no need for words. Sarah reached into her satchel and drew forth the scroll, still sealed, its wax unbroken. Calamir nodded once, then turned to the dark. Together they stepped into the passage, lanterns casting twin flames against the stone. The descent was unchanged, steep, cold, carved by forgotten hands. But the air was different. It was no longer empty. It carried breath, purpose, something not quite awake but stirring. In the chamber below, the tomb still stood, black and silent, but the air thrummed around it, as though the stone itself hummed with some unspoken music. Sarah approached the tablet on the far wall and raised the scroll. "I kept it safe," she whispered, and placed it gently at its base. "But now the world must choose." Calamir knelt beside the tomb. His fingers touched the smooth surface once more, and this time he felt warmth, not of fire, but of breath. Something within was listening. The stars on the mosaic floor began to glow. The chamber pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat in stone, and Elendor, though still silent, no longer slept alone. The chamber no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like the hollow before a storm, a stillness that was not emptiness, but a poised breath. The pause before a world draws in upon itself, knowing that something vast and irreversible is about to unfold. The light of their lanterns, once dominant in the darkness, now flickered against the faint glow that rose from the floor itself, as though the stars in the mosaic tiles were catching echoes of some celestial fire, reawakening from beneath. There was no sound, no movement, yet the entire space seemed to listen. It was not just stone and silence, it was aware. Calamir rose from his kneel, his fingers lingering a moment longer on the obsidian surface of the tomb. Though it had not moved, though no lid had shifted and no voice had risen from within, something within him had changed. He felt the weight of his own blood more keenly now, as if the memory of his ancestors stirred in his veins like a tide turning. Elendor, the last true light of the North Kingdom, had not returned in body, but his spirit, his intent, had awakened. And in that awakening, it reached out, not as a ghost yearning for the past, but as a fire that sought to shape the future. Sarah stood motionless, the scroll still pressed to her chest. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with the stunned clarity that overtakes those who realize they have passed the threshold between legend and truth. All her years spent among dusty tomes and forgotten runes had not prepared her for this moment. Knowledge had been her compass, her sanctuary, but this was not knowledge. This was revelation. This was the moment the dream steps forward and asks to be believed. And something within her, some quiet, unshakable certainty, believed. They did not speak. There was nothing to be said that would not shrink the moment with language. But slowly, Sarah moved forward and laid the sealed scroll upon the tomb. The wax, unbroken for years, shimmered in the faint light. She did not open it. That choice was not hers to make. It belonged to the world outside, to the coming hour, to the people who would one day need what the dream contained. Then something unseen shifted. It was not physical. No tremor moved the ground. No stone cracked or fell, but the air thickened, deepened, as if the chamber had inhaled. The lantern flames did not flicker, yet the shadows danced more wildly now, cast by a source of light not of this world. The stars in the floor grew brighter, their mosaic edges fading as their glow became real, not merely reflected. And then from the stone itself, a sound emerged. It was not a voice in the usual sense. It had no words, no tone. It was a feeling shaped into sound, a memory with rhythm. It began as a low hum, barely audible but rich with layers, like wind through the boughs of an ancient forest, or a distant choir singing in a hall too vast to ever echo. It resonated in the bones, in the breath, in the spaces between thought. It was sorrow and promise and silence breaking. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks and could not say when they had begun to fall. Calamir bowed his head, not in worship, but in recognition. This was not the voice of Elendor alone. It was the voice of all who had come before him, of Isildur, burdened with a cursed ring and the memory of a drowned island, of Valandil, who ruled without a throne, of Arvedui, who died in ice rather than yield a false crown. It was the voice of a lineage buried by time and shadow, yet never extinguished. And now it spoke, not with command, but with a single intent: remember. And just as it began, the sound faded, curling into silence like the final echo of a bell. The stars dimmed again, though not completely. They retained a faint glow, as if keeping watch. The air stilled. The chamber returned to its hushed slumber. But the hush had changed. It was no longer the sleep of things forgotten. It was the stillness of something waiting. Sarah turned to Calamir at last, her voice thick with emotion. "What do we do now?" He looked at her, and though his face bore no expression of triumph, it carried a kind of quiet peace. "We guard the dream," he said, "until the world can carry it." She nodded slowly, and her eyes drifted to the scroll, still unopened, still untouched. A part of her longed to break the seal, to know what Elendor had seen, what had driven him to hide even in death. But deeper still, she understood that it was not her time. The dream was not meant to be wielded. It was meant to be preserved. The words within were not weapons or answers. They were seeds. They left the chamber together, not hurriedly, but with a kind of reverent reluctance, as one does when leaving a place where something sacred has stirred. The path out of the cliffside felt different now, as if the stone itself recognized them. The air grew warmer with each step, and when they emerged into the fading light of day, the lake shimmered with a strange stillness. No ripple marred its surface. No bird called from the trees. It was as if the world had paused to listen to what had just passed below. They did not return to the tower. They did not raise signs or send messages. Instead, they made their way separately, as they had always been meant to. Two halves of a greater watch. Calamir turned east, toward the rising sun and the lands where old shadows might soon stir again. Sarah rode west, back to the records. She would continue to transcribe with calm hands and quiet eyes, hiding within them fragments of truth for those wise enough to see. Neither would speak of the tomb, nor of the song that rose from stone. They would wait. And in the deep chamber beneath the cliff, lit only by the glow of starstones and memory, the tomb of Elendor slept. Yet it was not sleep as mortals know it. It was the sleep of legends, the kind that do not end, but change form, taking root in hearts and bloodlines, waiting for the hour when they will be needed most. The seal remained unbroken, the scroll untouched, but the silence within had shifted. The dream was awake,